Welcome to the Impulse Spotlight, a podcast for product development professionals. In this episode, we interview the founder and CEO of Kessler Crane, a company that makes innovative tools for filmmakers. Eric sees himself as a pretty average person, but as you'll see, he's anything but average. In his downtime, he enjoys building and flying RC aircraft. Eric built his reputation as founder and CEO of Kessler Crane by focusing on his personal interests. From starting his first company, modifying paintball equipment as a teenager, to developing the best cranes and jibs in the business. We discuss the challenges that arise when going from making one product a weekend to hundreds of products a month. We talk about the pros and cons surrounding competitors and protecting IP, and speak on the exciting potential within 3D printing to produce fast and affordable parts. Eric delivers a unique story of his personal growth and shares advice to young product designers like talk with people actively in the community that are using your product, talk to teenagers who are your future consumers, and play lots of chess to build a habit of thinking proactively. Let's get into it. Hey, Eric, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Troy.
Sure. So to get us started, tell us how you got into developing products.
I was kind of raised that way. My father and grandfather I should be looking at the camera, right? Were both engineers, and they worked for a company called Curtis Products. And I, as a child, just grew up, anything that we wanted, we usually built it if we could instead of buying things. Or, even if it was a rototiller, when I wanted a go-kart, my dad and grandpa and I, we welded up. And we had a lathe and a mill in the garage, and we, kind of just made everything that we could make.
Cool.
Obviously it was a Briggs and Stratton 5-horse engine we purchased off of junk something, and then rebuilt the engine, and then so that was just my upbringing. How I got into actual product development again was just out of necessity. I was playing competition paintball around the age of 17, I think. And there was a lot of modifications that I started doing to paintball guns that people wanted me to do for their paintball guns because it was making them better. And so, I would machine up these, whether it was like tank mounting brackets or just little gizmos and gadgets that made the guns run, more efficient or had a better feel or ergonomics or performance, whatever. I would just start doing these changes and modifications for myself, and then other people would be like, I want one too. And so it kind of like I started making these parts just for side money. I mean, I'm 17 years old. I need to pay for gas and car insurance and things like that. And I was working in a Chinese restaurant. But extra money at that age is always good. So I would just make these bits and pieces for people. And that kind of fueled my hobby and, paid for me to drive around and have a girlfriend, which is expensive. That was probably the most expensive thing. And then eventually one of my products got into the hands of Tippmann Pneumatics, which was the paintball gun manufacturer. And the top designer, or Dennis Tippmann Jr., it was like, there's not a lot of people making accessories for my gun, and that makes it less. It was the most reliable gun on the market, but it wasn't really viewed as a performance gun. It was like a rental level. It was like indestructible. It was the minivan of paintball guns, I guess you would say. It's very practical, but they weren't cool. So the stuff I was doing, because I was on a budget and I wanted a good, reliable paintball gun, they were just as good, but they weren't flashy. They didn't have all the bells and whistles. So I was making the bells and whistles to make them be a performance gun. And so he's like, you should, these are actually great. You should start making these and selling. And that kind of just, I never wanted to be in business. I never wanted to, end up where I'm at. As a matter of fact, I still don't really care for the business side of things. It's the boring, painful part of the job for me. But anyhow, so that was, I'm like, maybe I should. So at the time I was working on an automatic firing system to turn my paintball gun that was a semi-automatic into a fully automatic paintball gun. There were at the time fully automatic paintball guns, but they were like $1,200, and I did not have that kind of money, and I knew how to do it. So I made a conversion kit that would make your cheap $100 gun perform like $1,000 gun.
Cool.
And I started selling those to friends, and I didn't have the money to really start a company, and I don't know. I'm trying to even think. You got to remember, this is 28 years ago. So remembering my mindset at that time, I don't remember. But anyhow, they fell into the hands of certain people, and it somehow got out to New Jersey, one of these, and fell into the owner of National Paintball Supply, and which was the biggest like distributor for paintball gun products. And his name was Gino Pastrovino. And he was like, and I remember getting the phone call. I was working over, so now I'm out of high school. I was working at a company called North American Sign. We worked a lot of overtime. It was a Saturday afternoon at 11 o'clock. I get a phone call from Gino, not knowing who this Gino guy is. And he's like, I'm the owner of National Paintball Supply. I just got this widget that you make, and this is amazing. How do I get thousands of these? And I'm like, what? I'm making them one off,
Right.
So, and I told him, I'm like, I'm like, it takes me a whole weekend to make me one. So how many? It's going to take 1,000 weekends. That's how long,
Right.
And so he's like, well, if you ever get to the point where you can do that, give me a call. And so that instantly, I'm like, okay, you got to remember, I'm 19 years old. I know nothing about manufacturing. I know nothing about any of this stuff. So I reach out to my dad and my grandpa and other people. I started taking these free, like, South Bend, Indiana, like they were mentor programs from business people and manufacturers, and started putting the pieces of the puzzle together. How do I, produce this thing on large quantity? And so injection molding was definitely the way to make for a lot of the components, because I was wire EDMing out some of like the sear parts, and how slow and like, so compression cast parts, or what do they call it, pressed metal, or what's that form? It's like powdered metal with not sandcast, not die cast, investment cast, or not investment casting. It's a powder. It's like they take powdered metal and they press it really hard, high Rockwell for the sear. When the bolt hits the sear on a gun, I forget the process. Anyhow, but I mean, these dies are like $30,000 a piece, and this type of thing. I think my first mold was like $18,000, and this is going back 30 years ago for the main housing. We didn't have 3D printing back then, and here I am, broke. My wife and I just built a house, literally moved in with $83 in my bank account, and we couldn't afford the light bulbs in it. I didn't realize when you had a house built, like it doesn't come with like contractor light bulbs that are crappy and got paint on them. And so we had no condiments, our first, so we're living off of borrowed dishes, and, that we were just starting our life, what I mean? So, and we built a house. My wife and I, we bought property in high school together. We weren't married, but I was hanging around with 40-year-olds, like in high school, instead of high schoolers. And so everybody was buying land. And so I'm like, well, I need to buy land. And my wife was working a part-time job, and I was working at Basney Ford Body Shop at the time. And so I had some income, and decided to buy property when I was in high school, and we had it paid off. So we used the land as collateral to get a loan to build our first house, which I was doing a lot of paint jobs, like side paint jobs. I mean, I was working 24 hours. Well, pretty much everybody at the age of 18 to 20 can go, like, well, I should say everybody, but, I had the stamina at that age to literally work from, 4 a.m. till 1 a.m. almost every day, and to make money, So I was doing everything I could. So we had built up some equity in the house. So I think I had around $30,000 that I could borrow against the house. And that's what I did to buy my first mold and kind of start all of this stuff. And anyhow, 6 months later, we have parts, production parts, and I am in debt up to my neck. I borrowed and begged from everybody to get to this point, and I call up Gino, and Gino answers the phone, and I'm like, "Hey, it's Eric Kessler," and he said, "Who?" Dude, that day it was the first time as an adult I cried. Literally, not on the phone,
Wow.
but that night. I mean, I was naive.
Yeah.
He said he wanted thousands. I'm gearing up to, it was supposed to be, yeah, okay, ship me 1,000. I didn't know that isn't how this works. You know what I mean?
Right.
And he had forgot about it, in the 6 months period of time. And here I am with like 1,000, enough parts to build 1,000 of these units in debt. Like, I've against everything that had any kind of asset value in my life. 5,000 to my grandpa, 10,000 to my dad, everything borrowed from my house that I could,
Yeah.
anyhow, a lot of promises. And, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like I said, I remember that night, like just literally scared to the point where I was like, I just ruined my life. You know what I mean?
Sure.
He did say on the phone call, send me 12. I'm like, Gino, you told me you wanted 1,000. And he goes, did I give you a PO? And this guy's a hard-nosed business guy. I'm like, what's a PO? He's like, it's a purchase order. If I didn't send that to you, I'm not buying 1,000. I'm like, regardless of what I said.
Right.
He goes, I probably said it loosely to you that, I could sell thousands of these or something, well, so I learned a lesson there. Either way, I'm here with 1,000. I build the 12 units. I ship it out to them with fingers crossed. And I start, after 2 or 3 days of being completely emotionally crushed, picked myself back up and started calling every paintball store that I could and saying, can I show you this item? And each one was like, that's cool, give me one, and they'd stick it in their store. After about 2 or 3 months, these people start calling me back. I'll take 3 more of those, and I'm reaching out. And this is right at the beginning of online, so that's how back, this is going. So everything was through these little mom and pop stores. So this is still when we had door-to-door salesmen, so that was the only way to get, that's what I was doing. I started hitting the pavement. And I didn't have anything else to do, right? So I had to, and I'm stuck in all this, and I have bills to pay. So it was really scary the first couple of months, but then, Gino's orders started getting to where literally he was ordering them 100 at a time within maybe, I don't remember the timeline, but within that year, they were selling pretty well. And I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then a friend of mine, that was right when the internet was out, but it was AOL was your standard, and so he was my age. He was trying to start a business being a web developer, so he built my online page.
Cool.
It wasn't a store because I don't even know if they had e-commerce at that time. It was literally you just you call it was an advertisement.
Right.
Search engines were crap, so you had to pay for banners on forums to get anybody to look at your website. So yeah, that was the whole how it got started type of thing was in, and then once I started interacting with the customers, it was just like going to the local paintball field. They're like, I hate this about this gun. Well, I shouldn't call it that, paintball marker to be politically correct. Can you improve this? Can you improve that? And if I heard it enough time, I would take a look at the problem and see, and some of them were like, I don't want to mess with it. Or some of them, it was mostly stuff that I personally could use or would benefit me. So I never worked for money per se. I had bills to pay, but I would only do projects that would benefit me. And I just hoped that there was others like me out in the world that would benefit from it too.
Right.
So it was, my motto always has been, I don't work for money, I work for smiles. And that, money comes after somebody smiles, you know what I mean? Because if I can make, that's what you're always paying money for, right? Is a smile when you think about it. So my philosophy has always been, if there's a problem, make it not a problem anymore. Then when that, people will pay for that. So that's always been, what has driven my, I guess, direction with what products that I manufacture or want to produce.
Cool. So what's your, I I think we're going to shift gears a little bit. What's your current role, and what kind of products do you develop now?
Well, my role is, I guess if you want to use, I'm not a titles person, but president, owner, CEO, whatever of the company. Um, and we're still small. We got really big there was a time, but going back to what I'm doing now is in the primarily robotics, like devices like this sitting right here, motion control units for the film industry
Okay.
or film related image acquisition, primarily broadcast, motion picture, live events, anything like, film, mostly film, or well, it's not film anymore. That's how old I am. Digital cinema,
Sure.
and some stills photography. But primarily in the stills world, it's only for time lapsing. So
Okay.
where you need to move a camera, but stop, take a photo, move it, we do some industrial applications that it's not developed for that, but we have military that uses our products. We don't know what for because they never tell us, but it's not for filming. They alter it. It's really hard designing. Like right now, we're making a product for the military that they just say it is very vague. Like the product you have already is very close to what we need, but it now needs to hold a weight at 1 foot out that's 50 pounds, and they give us these loose specs, and then we say, well, what is that, what's the job it has to do? We can't tell you. And
Yeah.
like, well, I'm happy to sign an NDA, still ain't telling you,
Right.
like just make it do this. Like, so it's blind to design, because like this new product we just did, we sent it over to them and they're like, it's really close, but it's not there yet. We need these alterations made. And so, but we don't even know what the objective is that this thing needs
Sure.
to do.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
How'd you
So,
get from paintballs to motion control for
well, yeah, that's a quick story. So, paintball had a overall, the paintball industry started from a bunch of there's two stories. One of them's probably true, or maybe both at the same time. So paintball originally was a marking device. I forget the name of the company. Became Splatmaster for paintball as a sport, but prior to that, it was mostly used for cattle marking and also forestry marking. So it was developed as a tool to drive around and shoot a tree that needed to be cut down or a cow that needed to be butchered. That was the original origin of it, was to not get out of your vehicle or off your horse or whatever you were on, shoot something to mark it at a distance and move along. Well, the story is that a bunch of farmers got drunk and decided to start shooting each other and thought it was fun. That's the story that's gone around. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. And then it became, like, honestly, there's probably some level of truth to it. There's a bunch of probably farm kids that would, instead of shooting each other with BB guns like we used to, start shooting each other with paintballs, and it became a sport. And it got popular enough because back then they only had they would hold a little capsule of 5 markers.
Okay.
It was permanent paint. Well, that was a mess. So Splatmaster, which I forget the name of the original company, start catching wind that most of their sales were being sold to teenagers to go shoot each other. So they came up with a water-based gelatin marking device, and it was called the Splatmaster. And it was the same 5 capsule tube, but they put 4 of them in a magazine that could be twisted, so you got 20 shots out of it. And that was the first marker intended for the sport of paintball. So then it just grew from there, and it just started snowballing, and other players started coming into it. And anyhow, so I can tell you the whole history of paintball because I was there for it. But anyhow, paintball at some point, and I'm assuming just like technology new technology kills old technology, right? Well, it's easier and cheaper to play Call of Duty on a computer than it is to buy a paintball gun and do physical activity and get exercise and be healthy. It's easier to sit on a couch and buy a $40 game or now Modern Warfare, which is free, as long as you don't mind paying for advertisements or whatever. And so, and you're not bugging your mom for $100 a weekend to go get
Right.
and induce pain of being shot by 5 grams of something flying at 300 miles per hour at you. You know, so
Right. Right.
different people and the young ones now, they don't like pain. They don't like, well, and I loosely say that it's not all of them, but you know, in the masses. So anyhow, video games pretty much killed paintball, and I was there for that. Sales started declining massively, and then towards the end, it was down to 2 big distributors. It was PMI out of Chicago and Gino and National Paintball Supply were buying up all of the brands to have exclusive rights to them to hang on to market share. Well, my company had went from, I don't know, we were up to maybe, I want to say 18, 20 employees. So still a small company, but most of our products were just injection molded parts that didn't even need assembly. But I was selling 10,000 a month of these things, you know, like triggers, you know, so I didn't need a lot of employees, but we were moving, you know, maybe 60,000 pieces of product a month, you know.
Oh, wow.
So it was like well, just Tippmann alone at the peak was selling 40,000 paintball guns markers a month. And I was making a specialized trigger for it that most people wanted. And there was some competition, but mine was the best one. And so I was probably selling 10,000 of those a month. And it required a pin and a spring for assembly, you know. So we had people just sitting down, you know, one every 2 or 3 seconds was being made and coming off the injection molding machine, you know, we didn't need a lot of employees to move a lot of product. So, and I get sidetracked easy. I got OCD real bad. So
No, you're all right.
Rein me in whenever you need to.
You're all right.
So what was the question now? Again, what are the core questions?
How did you get from paintball to the motion control?
So paintball starts dying off. Distributors start buying up all the small brands for market share. I happen to be one of those. During the period of transition, I was sitting in an empty building with my marketing guy, which doing tech phone support, and because the sales were now going to National Paintball Supply directly, but they didn't know how to support the product, so they kept us on, basically sitting in a big building, 2 guys just answering tech calls until the contract was up. And we were pretty much bored, and so we were at the time LAN gaming. I don't know if you remember that, with the beginning of like first-person shooter games, mostly playing video games most of the day as we were forced stuck at the computer. And he was my marketing guy, and digital film was just starting to become a thing, or digital, digital video. And he was an aspiring filmmaker, and you know that was what he always wanted to be. So he was editing a lot of his personal projects at work because we just have to sit here. And so I started seeing this, and he was showing me how to do it. And so I bought some cheap editing software. And at the time, it was just my new hobby. I never wanted it to be a filmmaker, but I just thought it was a cool thing, and you could videotape things and then chop it up and make it funny or whatever you wanted to do with it. It was just, I've always been a gadget geek. So it was just a new technology that I wanted to play around with. And so he was trying to make a film, low budget indie film, his first one. And he's like, I need a jib, which is a camera crane. I need a way to smoothly raise a camera up for the shot that I want to get. So we still had a lot of my fab equipment and, you know, the machines that I personally own. So I built him one, and he used it and loved it. And a couple of his buddies like, can you make me one? So it was kind of a repeat of how paintball got started.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up going back to North American Sign because I sold my company. I got out with my shirt on. I didn't make millions, but it was because the market had gotten so bad. The value of my company wasn't really that much, but it was enough to get out better than what most. I think I was 23 years old, roughly. And so for a 23-year-old, I was in pretty good shape. House paid off. had a decent amount of coin in the bank, not millionaire by any means, but I was comfortable. But I still needed to work. So on the weekends, I would build these camera jibs for him, and then for him, he's a starving artist. He's out of a job. So he was selling my jibs on eBay and under no brand. He was just like, so every week, it started off as build me 2, and then it was build me 5 this week, and then it was build me 10. I need 10 of them this week. I sold 10 on eBay.
Wow.
And I'm working a full-time job. And so it was just, the joke was, and my retired neighbor would help me because it got to be where 10 was a lot to do in a weekend. And so we lived on a lake, and so we called it beer and boat gas money. That's what that's nice. Pretty much, we were doing it to, buy us each a case of beer for the week, or not each a case. We didn't drink that much beer, but, buy a case of beer and fill up our boats and, fund our weekend our fun,
Yeah.
So, that's how it started. And then he was pitching his own TV show called Night Lights, and it got picked up on a channel locally here so our local channel was WSJV, and then they had this like weird channel called WSJV2, which was like a B channel to, like, it didn't even air stuff 24 hours a day. It was just like crap programming. Sure. Almost like a test platform.
Yeah.
It was a channel like back in the day when he still had the UHF VHF dials that would show up. And so they picked him up, and his show was about reviewing. It had 3 segments. It was basically he'd go to mom and pop restaurants and do a review, talk to the owner, kind of like what we're doing here. Like, why do you do what you do? And then it wasn't him. He was the cameraman, but he had this girl, whoever his flavor of girlfriend for the week was the girl talking that was doing the interviews, that would do a review on like a local store usually. So it was like non-commercialized stuff he wanted to get out. It was brilliant and it was actually informative for locals, because like there was all these hidden gems of like boutique stores or entertainment purposes or restaurants, that nobody knew about. So they had like it was a half an hour show. So whatever it was broke up into was 3 segments, and it was like 6 to 8 minutes roughly in between commercials. So he'd get food for dinner, or he'd get dinner for free that night, and he would charge them $500 to shoot the segment. So basically it was a commercial for these. But then I enjoyed watching it because it was like, oh, over in Elkhart, this restaurant looks amazing. I never heard of this restaurant. Or my wife was like, some dress boutique shop, and the owner could actually say why they're doing what they're doing and what their highlights were and why they should come and visit. And so that show actually took off to the point where he didn't want to sell my stuff on eBay anymore. But at that time, we were probably selling 30 a week.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, I didn't want to lose that. That was my side income, So I at that time hired a guy to build a more professional website, and you could buy them through the website. I was still selling them on eBay, so I took it back over. He went off on his own way, and his show ended up getting picked up in Indianapolis, doing the same thing. And he's still doing TV shows now on a much higher level, but that was kind of like his step. So his life went off in the track that he wanted. And being that I, again, am now dealing with the customer, they're like, hey, I love your jibs, but the tripods that I'm putting them on can't support it. They're in the tripods that are strong enough to support a jib arm, because, the arm's 20 pounds. You got a camera that weighs 10 pounds, and I have to counterbalance weight it. This is 60 to 100 pounds now. And I'm a cheap, broke artist, and I can't afford a $2,000 tripod. Right. So that was the next thing to build. I need to build a heavy duty tripod just for jib arm. It didn't need to have all this other, it just needed to support my jib arm. Mm-hmm. So that was the second product that I came up with. And then it was the pan tilt head. Then people wanted to be able to move the camera at the end of the jib arm. They want pan and tilt. So my first pan and tilt head was an analog remote pan and tilt head. And then people wanted, at the time, cameras were large. So they had these big right-on dolly systems, to move cameras left and right. Mm-hmm. So being that these are small cameras, why not make a little slider? Something that can just go on a tripod. Well, that was the rage. We were selling sometimes 400 to 500 of these a month.
Wow.
So it was, I just kept listening to the customer, and they were telling us what they needed next. Well, that was all great. We grew to like 70, almost 70 employees, 68, I think was our peak. And this was over a short period of time, 5-6 years. We went from working out of my pole barn, building camera jibs with a retired neighbor that pretty much was working for a case of beer a weekend, to, owning our own CNC machines and, eventually into a 60,000 square foot facility with 68 employees, over probably a period of 5 to 6 years. So pretty fast. It was like a 200 to 300% a year growth, and it could have been faster because the demand was there, because everything was shifting so quickly that as digital was getting closer and closer to the quality of film. Not only was it accessible to high schoolers because it was affordable as a hobby, but the film industry was converting from film into digital, which that's right where we fit. They weren't buying the big giant jib arms anymore. They weren't buying all the big industrial equipment. They wanted smaller, cheaper stuff. And the internet was becoming a thing where you watched videos. So content production was going through the roof. So there was all of this like perfect storm that, the film industry was just blowing up. And that we grew leaps and bounds until about 2012, and then it started tapering off because it had gotten so big that now all the knockoffs started coming out. The overseas company just started knocking our products off. At trade shows, they were so bold. I remember, I don't know if they were like, it was either Japanese or Chinese guys that were literally with micrometers in my booth measuring my products and taking photos.
Wow.
Like, I'm like, guys, I'm standing right here. You know what I mean? And they're wearing fancy suits, and they're just to go back home and start making and underselling me. And next thing you know, 3 months later, identical products to mine, without having to do the years of research and development. They didn't have the brand. In the beginning, it wasn't bad because it was still crap, but they got better and better and better. And like now today, the sliders coming out of India and China are, I wouldn't say they're as good as ours. They still have their own issues. They're still horrible on tech support, but they're cheap. They're so cheap, So as to where like our products, for a slider, quality sliders, $1,000. There's $100 units out there that will get the job done, but may not do it for longer than 6 months before the wheels wear out on them or whatever. But to some people, that's all they have. It's the same reason why, if you're a mechanic, you don't go to Harbor Freight if that's how you're making your living. But if you're just a guy that needs to take a spark plug out of his, lawnmower engine once a year, a Briggs or a Harbor Freight ratchet's just fine. Same kind of a concept. And
Sure.
So, that's how I got into the film industry.
Very cool. Very cool. So the whole purpose of this show is to let folks like yourself kind of spotlight a product that they're proud of. So tell us about the product that you want to talk about today.
Well, the one I'd love to talk about is the one we're releasing in 2 weeks, but being that maybe we can schedule another. I'll have to show you what our current. It's this here. It's the Cine Shooter. I don't know how well you can see it in this camera, but this is a motion control head. It has a laser right now on it because I was doing some testing. Normally, a camera, I should have been better prepared for this, would sit right here on a platform, and this would move up, and you can basically tilt the camera up and down, left and right. It controls the camera as far as when to turn on, turn off through our software. If you really, I don't want to bore people, but it's a robot for cameras. We have motors that can mount to the lens to adjust your zoom and focus, iris control. We have a slider system, which, basically we make devices that can move this camera without a human in 3-dimensional space to perform whatever task that they needed, whether it's for repeatability, because you're overlaying multiple layers of shots and they all need to sync up. Live events, if you want cameras like at concerts without human beings behind them, I can be sitting here. I have a 36-inch monitor with running 6 different cameras, and I can do like AI tracking. So I just draw a box around a certain face that I want that camera to track, and it can track that person until I say, okay, now I want to track this person or this subject. So it's automation. For time lapse people, if I want that beautiful, I want to start the camera, let's say, focus down on a rock or some cool item on the ground, and then slowly go wide with the image to reveal a beautiful landscape that then turns to night and see the stars moving. So this camera's moving very slowly over, let's say, 14 hours of time, taking a photograph every whatever you tell it to, every 5 seconds. I want it to move a little bit, take a photo, move a little bit, take a photo. And when you string that all together, you have this day to night transition and subject change and focus pulls and all this other kind of stuff that a lot of people see these things. They just don't know how they're done, unless you're in the film industry. But it's robots into it. And you can do that, with like, you can set it up with like PS4 controllers. We have iPhone apps, iPad apps. We have very sophisticated Mac and PC software. Like I could program and move and have it either triggered by an IO device. So we have ports saying, let's say you wanted to film a fox for the BBC getting out of a den. Well, with humans around, they're never going to come out, right? So you can go camouflage this camera, have a motion shot built up, ready to go, and then put an IR laser on that hole where he's going to come out and say, when I get triggered, start the camera, get the shot that I want, and stuff like that.
Very cool.
So
that's all in your software. That's all your software.
It does anything you want to do. Yeah, literally, our software it's taking. Like our first analog system, is basic. This is still used today, but it was manual control. You had some technology in it, but now we're to the point where you don't even need a human. It just needs prompts. I want to get this shot. Figure it out. Put the right camera on it, right lens on it. Tell it what lens is on there. Give it the prompts that you want it to do, and when it's supposed to do its job, it does its job. You can still manually control it. Like if I want to have manual control of it, like let's say it's a live event and you don't know what your subjects are going to do, you can either use tracking, but sometimes auto tracking, as well as it works, you might change your mind, right? Like, so you may want to actually grab a physical joystick, and and tracking has some limitations. Like if it can still sometimes get confused as to the subject. If it's just, let's say, a singer walking slowly across the stage, it's easy to do. But if that singer does a backflip or does a clothes change, like where they whip their outfit off and go into something else, it can get confused. And then now you need to grab the controls, so you never know in a real life situation when, the software is not that good yet. I mean, it's getting there, but it does things like for stop motion animation, which is very similar to time lapsing. I mean, I could bore you with, if you really want to like study the product, just go to the product website. There's a bullet point list of, anything you could ever want to know about it. But it's pretty much like a computer. It is. It's just it's a motion device, and within the ability of and we make a lot of attachments for this, like roll. We have a roll feature. We have like robotic arms. We have, so you can start off with something simple like this, which is just pan and tilt. Then you can add zoom, focus, and iris control. You can add a slider. You can add a robotic arm. You can, start making. It's like a Lego system or an erector set that can be programmed to do whatever it is that you want it to do. And then there's IO abilities, so that way you can have it be, you can trigger it by date and time. I mean, you can say, I've always wanted to do it, but how that feature came up was we had a beachfront place up on Lake Michigan, and every year the ice pack would move from the north across Lake Michigan and shove up on the beach. And it was massive. I mean, we're talking ice that bigger than barges, you know what I mean? Like massive icebergs. If the wind was in the right direction, these things would shove up on the beach and they would be stories tall of these blocks of ice. And it would always happen overnight. And I never get to see how this would happen. And then when they would melt, sometimes it was faster than others, but like I was never up there full time. It was like a vacation home. So what I wanted was I asked my software engineers, I want to do this motion shot over the whole winter season, but I only wanted to come on at these hours of daylight. So I'd say, you know, from the time of, I don't remember what it was, let's say 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I want to take 24 photographs and move that much of the movement. So I'm doing a 3-month time lapse. So every 24 frames is 1 second of video output, right? So I had to do the math in my head. How many images am I going to need to have a 30-second spot, you know, to cram 3 months into 30 seconds? And then I divided that by how many days, and then how many windows of time that it's coming on, how many photos I need during that time so I can get the final shot, you know. That's like when you see all these really neat, how do they do that shots for the BBC and National Geographic and those kind of shows, it's a lot of, you know, there's times where we've had customers where they've taken year-long time lapses of a section of forest, and you know, the camera is spinning or doing this motion over a year's time, but you're seeing the blossom of flowers, the decay, the snowfall, you know, how it changes. And it's, you know, stuff like this that does that.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what its intended purpose is. So it's everything from live events, what's happening right now. You know, during COVID, there was an uptick because people couldn't have camera people doing interviews in the same room. So that was kind of a big thing, you know. So our sales, COVID was still hard on us, like, because our normal market died completely because they weren't making films. There were very few live events. The only thing we were selling pan and tilt heads for was people that were like, hey, we still got to interview this person, so we're going to ship them one of your heads and tell them how to set it up, and we're going to, through the internet, control it and get the shots that we need to get, you know. So that was really the only sales that we had was, you know, just remote. You know, most people, Zoom cameras like what we're doing right now is good enough, but like for news stations, they still wanted to have that beautiful wraparound shot or whatever, and it's sparked up a lot of companies. One of them was called Camera Box, which were buying our systems and putting it like in a Pelican case ready to go. And they would, I don't know if they were renting them or selling them, but they would ship them to the interviewee and say, just open the box. And it had lights in it. It had the camera already ready to go. And it was like a portable, like video station. And they're like set in front of it. And then they would, just like a Zoom call, but they now had this sliding motion and all this other stuff and proper lighting, you know, if it had to be something better quality than just like a Zoom call, or I think we're on GChat, right? Is that what we're on right now? Yeah. So, you know, this is fine for conferencing and doing basic podcasts, but if you wanted any production quality to it, like as you build your podcast, eventually you might want a B cam, which is a secondary camera off to the side that's just, you know, doing this slow back and forth wraparound shot that you're cutting into to add more dynamics to what you're doing. And you don't want to pay somebody 8 hours to sit there and do that. For one, it's almost physically impossible for someone to do that perfectly for 8 hours, and it costs you money. So that's the other product that we make, which is called, with the smaller one, which is called the second shooter. Not to be confused with the guy that took out JFK, but it was the second cameraman that you didn't have to pay for, you know, or you paid for it once and you didn't have to keep paying them. So that was more of a budget specific use product, although it still does a lot of what this one will do. It's a little bit more streamlined down into like just interviews and doing more of a specialized set of jobs, so to speak, as to where this is more of our flagship. This is our current one. Before this was CineDrive, which was actually a more powerful system in regards, well, software wise, this is more powerful and electronic wise more powerful, but from a mechanical aspect, it was way more precision. Well, this is pretty damn good. But at the time, it was we shot for the moon, so we had an analog system, and then everybody said we want digital motion control. It's programmable and all this other stuff. So we, at the time, we were very lucrative in the industry. So I'm like, I want the best motion control system. So we put a team of engineers together, and we overbuilt this thing. And it was very expensive, but we had no competition. And at that time, people were actually buying industrial robots that were, let's say positive of $30,000 to do this. As for my system was $10,000, but by today's standards, nobody will buy a $10,000 motion control system. These are like 3,000, and so we've actually gone backwards. And as far as we had to come up with a way to make it more affordable because the market shifted and the days and competition is out there. At that time, I was the only guy doing it. So $10,000 was cheap because your alternative was $30,000 to $200,000. Now there's tons of options out there that are $1,000, So now it doesn't do what our system will do, but we have to stay down in that range. So it's like a race to the bottom, like it usually is in most industries. But the volume of what you sell goes higher, too, at the same time.
Sure.
So they become more of like a consumer grade type product versus an industrial grade product, which is what we built originally. And then we had to reduce it down to more of a consumer type product. But feature wise, we've continued to grow. So it actually does more from a software and electronic standpoint than what our original digital system did.
Cool. Can you walk us through a little bit the journey of actually developing that product and like what were the steps involved and
well, this one here in particular, you have to remember this is like, let's say generation 4-ish, 5-ish. So, in the beginning it was putting motors that just they're analog DC motors that just move things. And then it was some level of control. So it was writing PWM, basic firmware to control the motors more smoothly. We didn't have, and then it got to where people wanted repeatability, so we had to have encoders put on there so we could read position. So everything was like stepping stones of adding components based off of the demand, to the point where we're at now, which will do pretty much anything. And we're just now getting ready to develop new hardware, electronic hardware that has more components on it that will allow us to grow in the future of doing other things, which is I have to be careful about what we're talking about. So in case the competition's listening, they don't know where I'm going.
Understood.
So what was the specific questions? Like, I mean,
just kind of the journey of developing the product. Like,
yeah, I mean, originally it was just literally an L-shaped piece of metal that had two motors that panned and tilted, and then it had an analog joystick that just moved it around with rheostats for speed controls and a logarithmic dampening system for how fast the motors would take off and would respond to soften the motion. To just slowly, increasing, when we went to digital, that said, all right, now we know where the head is at, in space and time. And so therefore we had control over it. And when our circuit boards at the time couldn't do the next feature, we built more powerful, we put more powerful processors on there, more IOs, peripherals, things like that was required. And so it's kind of hard in a quick, but it's like any other, look at the first automobile compared to what we drive now. It wasn't like it went from the Model T to what you drive today overnight, one step. It was, let's put a horn on it. so people get out of the way, let's put air conditioning in it, let's do these types of things, fuel efficiency changes, stuff like that. So that was in a nutshell, how, that's probably every story of a product is, it's like, let's just get it doing something.
Right.
And then people will tell you what it's not doing. And then if you see an ROI in that, then let's go ahead and do it,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and you just keep going. And then competition drives you as well, right? So it's like, I know many times there was features that, it's like, well, we can do this, but no one's really asked me for it. And so I don't want to put money into it. But then my competition comes out with it and I see people respond positively to it. It's like, well, we need to do that now too, but let's do it better. Let's one up them. So that, so that's the nice thing about, competition sucks in the way of, you're constantly fighting to always outdo your competition. But for the consumer, it's great because it's always getting them more and more tools, and also keeping the price in check as well. Like so, and it gives us a job, right? If it wasn't for competition, I'd still be selling our Oracle system that we had 10 years ago because like it's the only thing on the market. So if you want to move a camera, this is what you get.
Sure.
So yeah,
What kind? No, that's cool. What I was just going to ask, you're still good on time?
Yeah, as long as we can wrap up, it's what, 2:00 now? Maybe the next half an hour, 45 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a few more questions and then we can wrap it up. I was going to ask what kind of manufacturing processes are involved. Is this done overseas? Do you do this at your place? Is it injection molding, machining? What all's involved in getting it done? Whatever
I
you
think
can.
almost sure. We do it all in house for the most part, and almost I can say 95% of everything that we sell is done actually in Indiana. So almost all of the design aspect is done in house. Not all of it. We work with you guys now on some stuff, but I would say the majority up until now, it's almost all design was done in house. Manufacturing, as far as machining goes, probably 90% is machined under this roof. There are certain components that require specialized machines that we don't want to invest in, so we subcontract those parts out, but to a local shop. Electronic manufacturing, the design of it's done under the Kessler employment, but the actual circuit board manufacturing is done in Elkhart, Indiana, which is like an hour away. The all final assembly is done under this roof. So we have our electric circuit boards show up. We put them in the housing, put all the motors in. We do have some overseas components. When you're dealing with electronics, it's almost impossible to not have that. Some are German, some are Chinese. Actually, no, I don't think we have any. Maybe some fasteners are Chinese, which I don't know if they are or not. Most of our electronic components are all Taiwan, which most people are. They're the headquarters for semiconductors. So all of our electronics mostly come out of Taiwan. Our motors are a combination of Taiwan and Germany. The Germans are really good at gearboxes and those kind of components. And then everything else is made by us. I would say this device, the whole external and chassis and all the main bits are made here. The circuit boards are made in Indiana, designed by us. The components on the board come out of Taiwan, mostly, as far as I know. And the motors come out of Taiwan. And even our like gears are made in Indiana through a local gear company. So very, very few things are, and we like that for a lot of reasons. One, we want to keep U.S. money in the U.S. Quality is the best part of it. Control of availability, like during COVID, Taiwan hurt us. It's not their fault, but that's why we're developing a new circuit board right now, is because it really disrupted the electronics industry greatly. And so it was a good time for Taiwan to, they obsoleted a lot of components that's in this, basically. So we're being forced into it. They had to streamline, And so they kind of did a shift on us with a lot of like motor drivers and things like that. And they're like, hey, at the volume that, because Taiwan produces, I think there's only like 3 chip, I think it's SMC that does like, what is it, 90% of all chips are made through
So,
SMC
yeah.
one way or another.
Yeah.
So they had to streamline and they obsoleted a lot of their stuff, and they developed a lot of new components that do multitask. So that way they have to make fewer parts. Well, now we have to design around those. Um, so which drove our cost up, because what happened is the hoarding started happening. Like our motor driver in this unit, we used to, before COVID, they were $6 a piece. Now we're paying $90 if we're lucky to find them for
Wow.
just a motor driver, because they're obsolete. They're out there probably in the tens of thousands, but people started hoarding them. And just like us, I mean, right behind my chair is a box full of them that's like sitting on gold,
Yeah.
because if your product still requires it, it's whatever you'll pay, and
Yeah.
there were people that took advantage of that. You had a lot of people that were buying. I mean, there was a lot of money to be made in, if you knew what SMC was doing, buy up all of it. Now you
Mhm.
own it all. You can name your price, and that's what happened. I mean, I heard we had people trying to sell us some of our motor driver chips in near $1,000 a piece. Well, I can't make. I mean, I need 8 of those. That's $8,000 increase
Yeah.
just on one component. No, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Luckily, there were people that weren't gouging as bad, but we got gouged. I mean, our circuit board in here went up almost 600% in manufacturing cost overnight, and we had to absorb it. Our market was dead, so you can't raise the price, and our manufacturing went through the roof, and the cost of living went through the roof. So you have your employees asking for more money to survive, and it was like we were getting squeezed. Like, I mean,
Sure.
you can't sell for more, but people need more, and everybody kind of felt it, and it's still going on to this day. I mean, it's a struggle, but our I think one of your questions were like, if you could do something differently in the future, what would you
Yeah.
do now? I will say, going into producing a product, make sure you're to the best of, this is the best advice I can give, that your supply chain is locked down for the shelf life of what you expect to get out of that product.
Mm.
I know it's still looking in a crystal ball, but keep that in the back of your mind. It never used to be an issue, but if I would have known 2 days before COVID, I would have bought 10,000 of these drivers, and some people did know. Or so the thing is, even in the beginning of COVID, I didn't think anything. The price didn't go up immediately. That happened 6 months into COVID. But a lot of people that were smart said, "Hey, SMC." Somebody saw the writing on the wall, and they bought them all, and or bought up lots of them. Well, I mean, I think Elon, at Tesla, that's how they survived it. They saw it when GM and all the other big car manufacturers had tons of cars sitting based off of a computer chip that they couldn't get. Elon saw it early and bought all that ahead of time, and it bought up, 10 years worth of chips. Now he might be throwing them away now because they've moved on behind that. Either way, it kept him in business.
Sure.
I don't know how many times in the last 3 years I thought we were going to have to go out of business, because without this guy, nothing else that we make was worth anything. So that's how, I mean, one little $8 part can shut down a whole operation, and I saw that firsthand. So keep that in mind when developing. Where are you going to get all of your stuff, and even with our new electronics, whether this is smart or not, well, I don't think it's going to be dumb. I'm buying 3 years worth of these components because the components we're buying are available now. They're bigger and better than what I'm paying $90 a piece for, but they're $3. So I'm going to go ahead and spend the money and make sure, at least for 3 years, we're not going to have this issue.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. So it's kind of like once bitten, twice shy, right? So that's my, I guess, advice to people, is make sure you understand your supply chain very, very well, because the world's a different place now. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and we never had to worry about where we were going to get parts from, up until now.
Yeah, that's pretreally crazy. Besides the supply chain stuff, what are some of the biggest challenges you saw in developing this product?
Not really. I would say, I mean, the challenge is always been for us is everybody wants a Cadillac and pay a Yugo price.
Yeah.
That's always been the challenge, right? Like um, how to achieve that, and we've done a very good job. I mean, if you knew the we make magic happen with this thing. Yeah, I can't, those are trade secrets, but some of the stuff that's inside of this machine should not be doing what it's doing, but we found out ways to make it do it. And that's allows us to give the performance of a Ferrari on a Ford Escort cost.
Yeah.
So it's doing things like that. Those were the challenges. Those you got to figure out on your own, and that's what makes us different than our competition.
Yeah. Yeah.
It allows us to stay competitive, but we outperform them by two or three times.
Cool.
But we're cheating, not cheating, but we're doing magic stuff that they haven't figured out how to do yet.
Very
So,
cool.
yeah.
What kind of prototyping processes did you employ when you developed this? Anything outside of the
Well, the
ordinary?
first one, back in the old day, you just built something before we had CAD. Usually we would start off like with a proof of concept, weld a bunch of metal together in a general shape, throw things at it, and just see if it like kind of does what we want it to do. So we're not wasting a lot of time. Now with SolidWorks and with CAD in general, you can kind of get in there and draw things and animate it and see if it, so you can kind of prove it out. So it's way more efficient now.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't cost as much money and you're not wasting materials and stuff. So we start off with, here's the problem. Do we think we can solve it? Is it something in our wheelhouse that we know, not only can we do it, but is our customer base that we're a brand now, right? We're not a startup. Startup
Right.
can do whatever they want because they have to establish themselves. But if you're already kind of, known for doing something, like I'm working on a project right now completely outside of out of the film industry, that I know is going to be amazing, but nobody knows who I am. So I'm starting off, you
Right.
talk to people in the film industry, they know the brand Kessler and it holds a lot of weight. But where this other product's going to go, they don't know me from Adam. So it's like I got to go out there and, start marketing and prove. And I'm going up against guys that, have been in the industry, that have the trust of the industry, and the rapport. So that's going to be the difficult challenge there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, again, I forget the original part of the question.
Prototyping processes.
Prototype. Yeah. So we now usually come up, the first step is a proof of concept and do it as crudely as possible, just to know, like I'm working on one right now, like, will this even do roughly what we think we want to do? And so we sometimes use off the shelf components, whatever pieces to get. Okay, yes, it will do it. All right. So then it's the refining stage. So then we start working towards a production prototype from there. Like, what is it going to look like? How heavy is it going to be? What's the physical restraints of it? We start doing board layouts, stuff like that. Can we cram everything into a package? And then we start looking at, being able to do it is always possible, but can we do it for the price point that we need to fit at in the customer base? So we have to analyze, we know the customer only wants to pay a ceiling amount of this, but we're already at, components are already so close to that. We say, all right, we're walking away.
Right.
Like we're too, like the spread isn't there for us to make, but if we're only at 10% of what we know the market will pay, like, hey, we have something here. So even if we're off and we got to increase cost by 30%, there's still 70% of margin there. By the time you take advertising out and dealer cost and all this other stuff, now the rule that I was always taught by Tippmann when I worked there under manufacturing, which is where I learned a lot from manufacturing from, was the rules of four. If you take the raw cost of a device and times it by 4, that's what the retail price should be. And people like, oh, you're gouging people. Well, you're not, because a quarter of it goes to the dealer. A quarter of it goes into future design. A quarter goes into the labor and manufacturing of that product and leaves you a quarter left for profit, So that's, and that's just, sometimes we get lucky and get 6 times, and there's other products we sell where we barely make a dime on, but it's a crucial component to the ecosystem. Like there's maybe a device that we make for this that we might even be almost borderline losing money on, but people need it, but it sells another part of it's the in-between piece, but we
Sure.
make money on that part, so there's lost leaders, right? So, or it's not really a lost leader, but sometimes there's necessary loss somewhere in the whole path, but overall you generate your profitability off of having that available.
Sure. What are some of the trends you see in product development? Like, as far as in your world, are there any interesting
3D
trends?
printing is the fastest one right now that's making things change really fast. 3D printers, we bought our first one, which was the Dimension, I think SolidWorks was the one that was like, I don't think they designed it, but they had like some exclusive rights to it. That was kind of like the first one that was popular or became mainstream. And but 3D printing now is getting to be production. I mean, we have a lot of parts that are 3D printed for production, and it's if you're going to do 20,000 of something, it makes sense to do injection molding. But there's still a lot of times that even if the quantity is there, 3D printing, they're getting so fast and affordable now that the flexibility of being able to change your product every year or every time, like in our case, we couldn't get screens. So we could change this housing overnight to fit a new screen, and as to where if we had an injection mold, that was a 6-month process and it cost us $30,000 or more to do. So now it's literally overnight. We changed the screen hole here, and by the next day we're up and running and had the parts overnight today with the new screens because we got a bad batch of screens in. So, or LCDs or OLEDs or whatever. So the flexibility of 3D printing now with MJF, and the next big one that I see that isn't there yet, but I cannot wait, is metal 3D printing. It's there, but it's too expensive for the masses. Rocket ships are fine when you got $1 billion budget, to have 3D metal, but selling, consumer grade type products or prosumer really is where this probably fits into. The metal printing isn't quite there. And, you still, the parts are really close, but the finish quality isn't great. And so there's still some secondary work on a lot of metal parts that need to be done. But it still speeds it up. But the product, it's good for prototyping. It's good for making those parts that are impossible to make on a mill or a lathe. But as far as running production, that's where I see, I think within the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to have 3D metal printers where it's going to obsolete mills and lathes for a lot of the industry.
Sure.
I know that's where they're pushing for because I'm seeing the machines that are there. They're actually printing now. I think Haas is doing it where they're 3D printing with a robot arm and machining for final in at the same time.
So they're printing into the
they're
CNC
in the machine.
Wow.
Like basically it's like a wire welder. It's a 3D printer that's welding the part, but it's crude and machining right behind the weld, so to speak.
Wow.
And so that's where I think you're, because you don't have any waste, right? Like you're not, you're buying spools of material and it's getting it within 10,000ths of what it needs to be. And it's cleaning it up right behind where it's laying the bead down or the layer down. And so I see that actually being it might be even sooner than 5 years. I know I've seen videos of them doing it. So it means they're in well beyond the proof of concept stage of it.
Yeah, that's cool.
These powder bed machines, I don't think the speeds. I think Haas is on the right track, but there's so many people running to that race who, you don't know who's going to win. But that's where it's going to be. But they're using a robotic arm that's basically building your part, just like a 3D printer would. But then they got these other robotic arms that are coming in and machining literally seconds behind the metal being welded together. So when you take the part out, it's done. and
That's awesome.
throw it in your tumbler and have it anodized or cerakoted or whatever you're going to do and ship it. So and I see and I know they're working on this too, is multi material printers. You got PCC or PC boards that can be 3D printed. Well, eventually I see them marrying all of this stuff where maybe this final product might come out of one machine done. I know that Boeing was working on 3D printing wings for planes, and actually being able to print the wiring and electricity and like hydraulic tubing all inside of the part of the structure. So basically you have a final product at the end, and then you just slap the wing onto the fuselage, which would also be, you just plug everything together, but it saves weight, saves material. So I think the 15, 20 year out range might, I see over at Elkhart, they're 3D printing boat hulls. Instead of laying up fiberglass molds, they're doing processes over there. At first, they were 3D printing the molds, which sped up the mold making. Now they're actually printing the boats.
Yeah.
So they're on huge like trolley systems with big heads, and so I think that's really has changed the ability to go from concept to sellable products in a very short, I wouldn't say it's short anymore, but a shorter period of time, and doing it much more cost effectively.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up, I always like to ask this, reflecting on all the challenges and successes you've had throughout your career while developing products, what words of wisdom would you share with people looking to make a significant impact in the product development industry?
If you still want to have hair and not turn to alcohol, don't do it at all. If you want a stress-free life,
don't do it.
Go punch a clock. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think that's different depending on your personality. I don't do what I do because for money, or it's how I'm wired, right? Like, it's just what I am. As far as like advice, again, trying to look into the crystal ball, really pay attention to where you think futures are going. You're never going to get it right, but the more you pay attention, the closer you're going to be to getting it right. And it's going to save you a lot of headache going forward. I mean, a lot of people put their blinders on. I know I did at certain times and just thought, there were points where the motion control product, that center drive, at one time, I got, I'll be honest with you, just to be honest, I got lazy. It's like, it's the best thing on the market. Why? I wanted to sit back and not design for a while, or only maintain and just build on the design I had. Well, competition came in and stuck me and got me in the butt pretty good, because they made a product that was a third of my price. Wasn't as good still, but it was good enough. And people, when it comes down to it, didn't want to spend $10,000, and they wanted to spend $3,000. And if I didn't see that writing on the wall, always try to stay ahead of the game. Play chess a lot. Seriously, it trains your brain into trying to be 7-8 moves ahead. Is very critical to you, not only for the product you're building now, but from a business aspect. If you're just a designer, your logic in your head might not be, you're so concerned with the health of the company, but just the product itself. But if you're the owner of the company, but as the developer, even if you're working for someone else, being as proactive on your design, for one, it's going to make you stand out as a better developer. You're more valuable to the company you're working for. And you're saving them. Just make sure that they know it, so they pay you well enough. If you're saving them money, you should be getting a cut of it too. But anyhow, just proactivity. Be as proactive as possible. Reactive sucks. It costs you a lot of money. It's inefficient, and you're always playing catch up, and it's hard to get your head above water again.
Awesome.
That's trying to read the futures. Talk to teenagers, because you're going to be making things for them. They don't have money now, but they will in about 5 years. and that's going to be who you're going to be making things for.
Sure.
That's another bit of advice.
Awesome. No, that's great advice. So yeah, this has been fantastic. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to mention with regards to your product or product development in general, or Kessler, or anything like that?
No, I don't like to toot horns or whatever. I mean, we just try to do the best that we can do. I don't want to turn this into a commercial. I thought this was more of hopefully, maybe I said one thing that can help somebody else out and maybe save them a headache. One less gray hair that they have to endure going through the painful process of, building one thing is easy. Mass producing something is, now you have to build the things that need to build the things.
Right.
So there's a whole, lineup of that. Keeping your stress on, I guess, more personal level. And again, you're speaking to the guy that develops product and bears the responsibility of the company at the same time. So where that's two different things. So if I'm talking to an employee that's a product developer, he's only wearing part of the burden. I'm carrying a lot of the other burdens too. But keep your stress, even for somebody that's working for someone else, keeping your stress under control. And I know they have stress because they're under deadlines and timelines, and they know their job, the healthiness of their company might mean whether they still have a job or not. And so, but if you lose, it's not worth, now that I'm almost 50, I gave up a lot of myself, in the process of trying to, get to success that I'll never get back again. So manage that in a balance. I mean, you also don't want to not do anything and sit on a beach all day, but make sure you're setting aside your sanity, at least a section of your sanity, for yourself. That's also very critical. Otherwise, you get to a certain point, you don't want to get to burnout, and I've been really close to it a lot over the years. And, at the end of the day, we want to be happy, right? So if you burn yourself out, you're not happy. And then all of a sudden, it's not fun anymore. So try to keep it fun. Understand that producing new things for the betterment of the world in some way is important, but not at the expense of killing your, oneself's happiness. So always try to keep a section of that alive. Even if it's, you can give up 70% of it, but keep, 25, 30% for yourself at all times. Because once it's gone, it's gone. You're not getting it back, or getting it back is very difficult.
Sure. Oh, that's great advice.
Yep.
So, before we end, if somebody wants to know some more, where can they find out about your product?
KesslerCrane.com is our website. If you want to just check out what we do, a lot of neat stuff, especially for geeks people. Even if you're not a film person, it's geeky robot stuff, so a lot of mechanical moving things, and so yeah, if you're bored and want to watch some, or if you just want to see how certain film shots are done, we have a lot of that stuff on our website, because we use that as part of our marketing. Is like, look at this cool shot, and people go, ooh, ah. And it's like, guess what? That's how they did it, So it's almost like when a magician tells you how they do the trick, that's part of, it kind of kills a little bit of you once you figure it out. But at the same time, it's pretty neat seeing, how things are done, behind the scenes. So yeah, if you want to check it out, it's Kessler, Kessler, Crane, CRANE.com. A lot of resources on there, and the whole industry is kind of a cool industry, as there are many. I spend my whole morning coffee time watching YouTube videos. I was finding out this morning that the blue LED was almost impossible. So almost 30 years, RCA and GE and all these big electronics companies could not figure out how to make a blue LED. It was impossible, they said, by many people. And it took one person to figure out. And it was, for me, it's like when some people watch a movie, it's like, how did they do it? Are aliens real? Whatever. And it's that one thing that said was impossible. And then it's like, when they figured it out, it's like, well, that was the simplest damn thing in the world. Why didn't, but they it was a race, because, right now what we're watching on is RGB LEDs, right? It's a combination of red, green, and blue. Well, they had red and green. That was easy, but nobody could do the blue. And they actually said it was impossible, based off of the technology of LEDs, to ever create blue.
Yeah.
But obviously we have blue, and so that was a really interesting. That's how much of a nerd I am. That's how I spent my morning, was watching stuff like that, and but it was fascinating, and it was really thinking outside of the box on how to get it to do that. So I really applaud so many things that we take for granted. Like that. I mean, this cell phone in your hand is 10 times, a million times more powerful than the
Yeah.
computer that put a rocket ship on the moon, if it really went to the moon.
Right. That's a whole other podcast.
That's a whole nother discussion. But, but we, kids walk around with it all day long, and it's taken for granted, but the amount of power that, I mean, the ability that you and I are talking on this right now, I'm old enough back, you had to ride your bicycle to your friend's house if we wanted to have this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't share it with anybody else unless you wrote a book,
Right.
So yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. I'll post the website in the show notes and make sure everybody's got a way to read more about your stuff.
Sounds
But
good.
I
Well,
really appreciate you being on here.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Troy. I'll get with you on other project stuff as we get going on that stuff. Have a great rest of your day. Appreciate you putting up with my long-winded ridiculousness.
Good stuff.
Yeah, my wife can't handle it. She kicks me out in the garage every day. So you only had to do it once. That poor woman, she's got this every day.
All right, Eric, I appreciate it.
Take care. Have a great day.
To learn more about Impulse and how we might be able to help you, visit impulseproductdevelopment.com.